Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you all for joining us. My name is Dave Bowden, the news editor here at Ballotpedia. The Supreme Court finished its 2019-2020 term earlier this month after a coronavirus-imposed break in the spring, which led to them issuing opinions in July. And we'll get into that a little bit more later. As avid watchers and followers of the court, we thought it would be good to take a final look back at this recently concluded term, examine some interesting facts and figures, and whet your appetite for the next term, which amazingly is only less than 3 months away. So to do that, I am joined today by Sarah Reynolds and Kate Carcella, two staff writers on our elections team here at Ballotpedia who extensively cover the Supreme Court. So Sarah and Kate, thank you very much for taking the time to talk with me today.
Happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
Hi there. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so let's just start with a brief introduction on the overall topic before we get into all of the fun stuff we have and details and whatnot. So Kate, can you give us a quick overview of the Supreme Court?
Sure. So the Supreme Court of the United States is the highest judicial body in the country and leads the judicial branch of the federal government. You may know it by its acronym, SCOTUS. The Supreme Court is the only court established by the U.S. Constitution in Article 3. All other federal courts are created by Congress.
All right, thank you for that. And I know it feels like forever ago, Kate, but when did this recently ended term start?
Yes, it does. By law, the court begins its yearly term on the first Monday of October, so it started its 2019-2020 term on October 7th. The court agreed to hear 74 cases this term. The Supreme Court hears and reaches decisions in an average of 76 cases per year.
Great, thank you. All right, now I mentioned it in the intro a few minutes ago, but the Supreme Court schedule, like everything else, was disrupted this year as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. So, Sarah, can you summarize those changes for us?
Yes, so the Supreme Court really did have a unique schedule this term because of the coronavirus pandemic, which really threw a wrench into the court's traditional scheduling practices. Back in March, the court closed to the public indefinitely, and it later postponed 19 hours of oral arguments that were supposed to take place during its March and April sittings. For a bit of comparative history, the court last postponed arguments in October 1918 in response to the Spanish flu epidemic at that time. And before that, argument calendars were shortened in August 1793 and 1798 in response to yellow fever outbreaks. So this is not something that happens very often with the Supreme Court. Next, in April, the Supreme Court announced it would hold oral arguments by teleconference from May 4th to May 13th. So the court doesn't usually hear arguments in May, and it has never had live audio of arguments in its history. So this was really unprecedented. And traditionally, the court finishes releasing opinions for the term by June, but this year the term went into July, and the court was releasing opinions up until a record-breaking date of July 9th. This is the first time the court has released opinions into July since 1996, so it's been a while. And it's the latest date in July that the court has worked since at least 1960.
All right, that's a lot of unusual events, as you mentioned before. Now, did the May sitting cover all 19 hours of oral argument that were originally postponed? What happened to those cases?
Right, so not all of those postponed arguments were heard this term. Altogether, there were 13 cases that were meant to be heard this term that never got heard. And of those, 12 were supposed to be in March and April, but those 12 cases have been rescheduled for next term, the October 2020-2021 term, which will begin on October 5th. And we'll dive into a little bit of what's going on with that term later in this webinar. The one remaining unscheduled case was Sharp v. Murphy, which was actually already held over from the 2018-2019 term. And instead of rehearing that case, the justices agreed to hear McGirt v. Oklahoma, which concerned the same legal questions. And Sharp was eventually decided based on the reasons provided in McGirt.
Got it. That's all great information. All right, so let's now get into the details of what happened this term. So Kate, can you give us some overall numbers about cases and opinions?
Sure. So the court released 63 opinions this term. The court has reversed 21 decisions and affirmed 21 decisions. It vacated 19 decisions and granted an application for a stay to halt proceedings in 2 decisions. Of those 63 opinions, 53 were signed, so that means that we know who wrote the opinion. Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Neil Gorsuch wrote the most opinions this term. Compared to the previous term, Chief Justice Roberts wrote the same number of opinions and Justice Gorsuch wrote fewer opinions. Justices Thomas, Breyer, Alito, Sotomayor, Kagan, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh all wrote more opinions last term than they did in this term. However, we always have to keep coronavirus in mind, so it's understandable that the justices would write fewer opinions this term since they heard fewer cases.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think the answer to 2020 forever is going to be we always have to keep coronavirus in mind. All right, one other thing that I know people are really, really interested in is the numbers of those really closely decided cases, the ones that result in 5 to 4 opinions. Do you have any information about that, Kate?
Yes, absolutely. So the court issued 13 5 to 4 or 5 to 3 decisions, which accounted for 21% of the total opinions released in the term. Those decisions were made by 4 different configurations of justices. Across those decisions, 69% had a majority made up of all 5 justices appointed by Republican presidents. So that would be Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, and Kavanaugh. The rest had a majority made up of the 4 justices appointed by a Democratic president. So Ginsburg, Breyer, Sotomayor, Kagan, and then with 1 Republican appointed justice. Historically, since the 2005-2006 term, 21% of the opinions released in a term are 5-4 opinions. The court had the highest percentage of 5-4 opinions in the 2006-2007 term at 33%, and the lowest percentage of 5-4 opinions was in the 2015-2016 term at 5%.
Yeah, that's all great information to know. And of course, the 5 to 3 decisions usually result in cases where a judge has to recuse themselves because maybe they were part of the judges that heard the case on its way through the process. And it's always interesting how there's a lot of media attention, a lot of focus. I think there's sometimes a perception when I talk to people that there's most of the decisions are 5-4 decisions. But as you pointed out, Kate, they account for 21% of the total opinions this term, and that was right in line with the historical average. So really interesting stuff. All right, one more thing that I know that court watchers follow quite a bit is where the cases come from. That's in other words, where do they originate? Now, generally, many cases come from the various numbered federal appellate courts, the 3rd District, the 7th District, etc. But some also come from state courts of last resort, like a state Supreme Court, and there's other courts as well. So can you walk us through that information, Kate?
Sure. So looking at our lovely chart here of cases by court of origination, the lower courts with the most cases before SCOTUS this term were the 2nd and 9th circuits with 9 cases each. 11 cases originated in state and district courts, and then 1 case originated from the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Armed Forces, which was United States v. Briggs, a case consolidated with United States v. Collins.
And of course, this is the breakdown of the cases as they were originally scheduled or accepted until the coronavirus pandemic affected the schedule. Now, one thing I know that really avid followers of the court track are those cases where the court reverses the decision from the court that it came from, and just kind of understanding the breakdown of those numbers. Now, Sarah, we actually have a decent amount of historical data about that. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right. So Ballotpedia publishes data on SCOTUS reversal rates, which is what you're asking about every year. And right now we have data on those rates from the 2007 term to the 2019 term, which just ended. So between the 2007 term and now, SCOTUS released opinions in 993 cases, which, as Kate mentioned earlier in this call, is about 76 cases per year. 71% of those opinions reversed a lower court decision. So that's 696 of the 993 cases, while 29% affirmed a lower court opinion. Again, during this time, the 2007 to 2019 term, the Supreme Court decided more cases originating from the Ninth Circuit at 191 cases. The next most circuit was the Second Circuit, which had 73 decisions. So you can see that a lot of cases originate in the Ninth Circuit, much more than from any of the other circuits. So also during this time, 2007 to 2019 terms, the Supreme Court overturned a greater number of cases originating in the Ninth Circuit. So that's 149 of the 191 cases. That's 78% of the Ninth Circuit cases that get overturned. And however, the court overturns a higher percentage of cases from the Sixth Circuit at 79.7%. But that's 55 of 69 cases. So some interesting statistics there. And just for some geographic context, the Ninth Circuit has jurisdiction in Alaska, Arizona, California, Hawaii, Idaho, Montana, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington, a lot of states. The Sixth Circuit has jurisdiction in Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, and Tennessee.
All right, thank you for that breakdown, Sarah. That's really, really interesting. And that data that you just mentioned includes numbers from this term that just ended. How did this year's data on reversal rates and so forth match up to those historical numbers? Can you give us any of the data for just this current term, the one that just ended?
Yes, so for this current term, the Supreme Court reversed 46 lower court opinions, that's a 66.7% reversal rate, and affirmed 23. So the term's reversal rate was 3.4 percentage points lower than the average rate of reversal since 2007, and that average rate is 70.1%. I also just want to note that we get our data from statistics provided by SCOTUS blog, and they create that data based on how the Supreme Court decision impacted a lower court. So when we're dealing with these numbers, there are some consolidated cases that are being counted separately.
All right, that's great context, and it puts it into a nice perspective. And it does indeed get very confusing when the court combines cases, which they do from time to time, if they have cases that all relate to a similar topic or legal principle. Now, the three of us think that every Supreme Court case, every Supreme Court decision is really interesting and noteworthy. But if we talked about all of them, we'd be here for hours, and obviously we're not going to do that here on this webinar. So let's just highlight a couple. So Sarah, what was one noteworthy case that really stood out for you this term?
Well, one noteworthy case that Ballotpedia was really interested in, so I imagine our readers would also be interested in this, was Espinoza v. Montana Department of Revenue. So Espinoza originated in the Montana Supreme Court. The case was about whether the government can exclude religious schools from student aid programs. It concerned Article 10, Section 6 of Montana's Constitution. And this provision, Article 10, Section 6, is known as a Blaine Amendment. And Blaine amendments generally prohibit the state from making direct or indirect public fund payments to religious schools. And these types of amendments actually exist in addition to Montana's constitution, they're in the state constitutions in 36 other states. So in a 5-4 opinion, the court reversed the Montana Supreme Court and The US Supreme Court held that Article 10, Section 6, the Blaine Amendment, violated the US Constitution's free exercise clause, which guarantees the right of free exercise of religion. Chief Justice Roberts wrote for the majority, and he said, quote, "A state need not subsidize private education, but once a state decides to do so, it cannot disqualify some private schools solely because they are religious."
All right, yes, that was definitely one that was, the opinion was issued towards the end of the term, and it will definitely have a long-term effect on policies across the country. As you mentioned, Sarah, there are similar provisions as the Montana one that exists in over 2/3 of state constitutions. So that will definitely have some effects. So Kate, what one noteworthy case stood out for you?
Well, like you said, many noteworthy cases in a noteworthy term. One that caught my attention was Bostock v. Clayton County, Georgia. Gerald Bostock was the Child Welfare Services Coordinator for the Juvenile Court of Clayton County, Georgia. He was also involved with a gay recreational softball league. His employment was terminated, and then Bostock sued the county for discrimination based on sexual orientation, asserting a Title VII violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The federal district court dismissed the case, and then on appeal to the 11th Circuit, the court affirmed the district court's ruling. And the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 opinion, the court reversed the 11th Circuit's judgment and held that an employer who fires an individual merely for being gay or transgender violates Title VII. Justice Neil Gorsuch delivered the majority opinion of the court. Justice Samuel Alito dissented, joined by Justice Clarence Thomas, and Justice Brett Kavanaugh also filed a dissenting opinion.
Yeah, and that was another ruling that came out really close to the end of the term. So that made for a very exciting period in June and July for us here at Ballotpedia, and also all those folks who follow the court. Like I said, we could go on and doing this in our planning sessions and our run through for this webinar. I think we started to do exactly that, but we're gonna end that for here. But just a reminder that we have case summaries for all of the court's decisions on the page for the 2019-2020 term at ballotpedia.org. So if you go to our website and you find get the page for this current term, do a search for 2019-2020 Supreme Court term, you'll be able to check them all out, and it just makes for fascinating reading. All right, so let's change our focus now a little bit to look at what will really only be about 10-11 weeks away, and that is the next term. So Kate, do you have some numbers for this upcoming 2020-2021 term?
Yes, and it's a little mind-boggling that October is coming up so quick, but the Supreme Court is scheduled to begin hearing cases for the term on October 5th, 2020. So far, the court has agreed to hear 31 cases during the 2020-2021 term. The court has already scheduled its October sitting, which will take place from October 5th to October 14th. The court will hear 10 hours of oral argument, and it will be considering the 12 remaining cases it rescheduled from the 2019 term. Right now, we're not sure how the court plans on conducting oral arguments. We don't know if they'll be via teleconference or in person. If they are in the courtroom, we don't know if there will continue to be live audio streams. In fact, back in May, Senate Judiciary members Chuck Grassley, a Republican senator from Iowa, and Patrick Leahy, a Democratic senator from Vermont, asked the court to permanently provide live audio of oral arguments even after the coronavirus pandemic. The senators also requested that the court provide live video access to oral arguments. But normally the court releases audio and transcripts of oral arguments on Fridays. And if you want to know more about the upcoming term and the cases under consideration, we encourage you to visit our term page for cases in the upcoming October term.
Excellent. Yes, and how the court handles this brief introduction to doing live audio will be very interesting to see how that carries forward to the new term. Before we wrapped up, we did receive a reader question prior to the webinar about Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg's recent hospitalization, and there's also rumors about potential retirements. The end of any Supreme Court term tends to produce speculation about changes in how the court will be comprised in the next term. Part of me wonders whether or not it's kind of like in the off season of sports fans when they want to talk about trades and all kinds of other things that never really come to pass. But recognize that speculation and those stories are out there. So Sarah, can you give us a little bit more information about the court's composition and anything we should be thinking about?
Sure. So to respond to about Justice Ginsburg's hospitalization, on July 17th, the court released a statement from Justice Ginsburg explaining that she began chemotherapy back in May. And Justice Ginsburg said the chemotherapy was yielding positive results and she was satisfied with her treatment. She said she's going to continue biweekly chemotherapy, but that she's able to maintain an active daily routine and keep up with her court work. So as far as we know from the statement, she plans to keep going and no retirements so far as we know. As to the speculation of other justices retiring, nothing definitive has been announced. And just in case readers are interested, we've got a chart here of the ages of the justices, since I know that comes into play a lot when there are these stories circulating about whether or not someone might retire. And just a note, the Chief Justice is 65, Justice Ginsburg is the oldest at 87, and Justice Gorsuch is the youngest at 52.
Yeah, this is a really, really fascinating chart. And of course, the judges are all listed here in order of their seniority on the court, except for the Chief Justice, who was always listed first. So this is also really interesting information. All right, we're about out of time. This has been a really interesting look at the Supreme Court overall, and hopefully it whets your appetite for the new term that comes up, like I said, not too far away at the beginning of October. So thank you very much, Sarah and Kate, for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
To be here.
All right, I hope you enjoyed this look at the Supreme Court, the highlights of the last term, and a look at where things stand during this admittedly brief period in between terms. And to stay on top of all things associated with the federal judiciary, including the Supreme Court, you really want to subscribe to our Bold Justice newsletter. It's really, really fantastic. It covers all the goings on at the highest court in the land, information about vacancies, nominations, confirmations of federal judges. You'll stay in the know about all of this stuff with that Bold Justice newsletter. So you can find the link to subscribe on our homepage if you just type in Bold Justice in the search bar. We mentioned briefly the effect that coronavirus had on the court schedule this year, but it also affected so many other areas, of course, and we are tracking those extensively with our coverage of the pandemic and the federal, state, and local policy responses to it. We have links to all of that coverage also right on our homepage, including compilations and analysis of closures of state and local courts, business restrictions, election changes, decisions about school closings, reopenings, so much more. So you can take a look at those as well. And then finally, elections took a bit of a hiatus in the spring, as did much of everything. But the primary election season for statewide offices and Congress is back in full swing. And August is a very, very busy month for primaries. July was a little bit slower, always tends to be, but August is a very busy month. And we'll be covering all of them at ballotpedia.org. And just follow the links to our various overview pages to access that coverage and those resources. So finally, if you want to get all this information sent right to your email inbox, we encourage you to subscribe to our newsletters, and we have a bunch. And it includes the Daily Brew, which comes out every weekday, and our summary of each week's political news in the Tap. So thank you very much for watching and joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.